Now to that story that we've been covering on Cuba. I want to bring us and have a conversation with Anne-Louise Bardash. She is a Cuba expert, and I must say I'm a bit of a fan. I've been reading all your books, fascinating stuff. Just give me some sense. I don't know if you heard some of Patrick's report there, but this relationship between Fidel Castro, the Castros in general, you know, Fidel chased the church off the island, banned Christmas. There's a lot of history to get over here.
Yes, yes, indeed. But it's even more interesting than that because of the Fidel and Raul Castro were raised by a family that had some money, but were not an educated family. They were a farm family, and they worked very hard, and they lived in Oriente, the eastern side of Cuba. But the mother had great aspirations for her sons, and she sent all the sons to Jesuit schools because Jesuit schools were known in Cuba as the best schools. And she knew if her sons had this education, they would be more likely to succeed. Fidel Castro really took to his Jesuit education and became very, very close to a priest when he was quite young named Father Llorente. Raul Castro was not an intellectual at that time, and he could barely get through some of these schools and eventually dropped out of Belen. And when they took power, though, and they declared it a communist state, well, God was banned, basically. And the Communist Party, as part of its charter, was an atheist country. And this was part of the charter. And in fact, the church was viewed quite suspiciously by the Castro brothers. And soon enough, priests were arrested. In fact, most interestingly, the Archbishop of Havana, Jaime Ortega, was arrested during the sweeps of the 1960s to root out dissidents, homosexuals, and Catholic priests and other Masons. And he actually did 10 months in a very unpleasant work camp. And so he knows firsthand what it's like to be on the wrong side of the Cuban government. But now we have, 50 years later, Jaime Ortega's evolution as a power broker, because he played a very important role in bringing Francis in and allowing the Vatican to play a very important role in the negotiations between the U.S. and Cuba.
What does this tell us about Raul Castro in particular? His son, as our correspondent mentioned, was involved in these negotiations. This is now not about being particularly holy. I mean, the Castros and Raul in particular being more pragmatic.
That's exactly right. I think they came to a realization somewhere in the 90s during what was called the special period that we are unable to eradicate Catholicism. Now, people may want to know, why would they want to do this in a deeply Catholic country? Well, because the Castros, as they tightened their grip on power, realized that groups of people together could pose a problem. And therefore, the only group that was allowed to have large congregations was the Cuban Communist Party. They became very wary of what priests would be telling congregants. And not without some cause. The dissident movement in Cuba has always been embraced around the church. Osvaldo Paya, who started the Varela Project. The Varela Project is named for a very famous Cuban priest, Felix Varela. And the ladies in white, what do, this dissident group? Every Sunday they walk down Fifth Avenue, dressed in white, silently holding white flowers, and they walk into a church to demonstrate their distress over all the political prisoners of their relatives that are in jail. So all the dissident groups, yes.
Sorry, my question is, what then does this new rapprochement mean for Cuba? Because how will this government deal with a more active, a more open, more present Catholic Church?
Well, they're moving slowly. Everything about this negotiations, whether it's with the U.S. and with the church, has been slowly. The Cubans are ferocious negotiators. They do not give up points easily. Now, remember, the church is coming to Cuba with an agenda. A lot of church property was confiscated by the Cubans. Important Catholic schools, cathedrals, major sites that were church property were made into, say, military barracks in one case. The church to this day is not allowed any Catholic schools on the island. They're not allowed a TV station or a radio station. All the privileges that the church has in most other countries, they do not have. And so they have an agenda. Let us back in. Let us have our property. Same as the U.S. agenda. We want to reclaim the property. You confiscate it. But the Castro brothers also realized they're not going to get very far if they don't embrace the church. So they're in this for practical reasons, and also this makes them look good. This is a very popular pope. And remember, this is the first Jesuit pope. And as Raul Castro said to him when they met, you know, I too am a Jesuit, because he went to Jesuit schools. And he said, I like what this pope is saying. You know, a lot of people think the pope is talking what used to be called liberation theology. Well, one could argue again. He's pointed out the problems he has with capitalism, but he's also very pointedly talked about the problems with socialism and communism and how it eclipses the spiritual part of man. He wrote a very interesting book about the dialogues between John Paul and Fidel Castro in '98, because he attended that trip, and he then wrote up a very interesting book about his impressions. And this is going to be an interesting tango. Now, we also know that Pope Francis has made a request, or the Vatican did, for him to meet with Fidel Castro. Everybody wants to meet the movie star dictator. And the response, however, was, look, we'll put it in our books, but pencil it in, because we do not know if he'll have the health to actually do this. We can't guarantee how he will feel after the Mass. But after John Paul's Mass in 1998, where I was there, the Castro family, all of them, all the surviving siblings, had private audiences with John Paul, and you know, several members of that family have remained devout Catholic. Fidel and Raul's older brother Mongo, the sister Augustina. So it's quite an interesting story, because members of that family have never forsaken their faith.
Never
and
really
the other
broken
thing
those ties with the Vatican, despite the fact that the
Right.
Castros essentially banned the church. Lots
That's
to talk about. You've also written a great article on Politico, which I sort of urge our viewers to go and read, because it really breaks down this relationship between the Vatican and the Castro government. Anne-Louise Bardache, thank you so much for joining us here at CNN. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.